We've seen a number of cases where justice takes many years to arrive. But usually in those cases they are still straightforward. But there has just been a wait for technology to catch up with biological evidence that was left but could not be analysed at the time. Today's case took around 13 years to come to a conclusion, but it was somewhat more convoluted based on stories that got told over time. But despite the different directions the investigations took, the final result was the correct one. It just took a somewhat circuitous route to get there. This is the very mysterious disappearance of Brittanee Drexel during spring break in South Carolina in 2009, and the bumpy road to justice that followed over the next decade and beyond. This is Murder of Crows.
You say that you're ready, but you won't like it. You say that you're ready, but you won't like it. Silence all the crows, lining up in little rows. A sudden chill surrounds me. Silence all the crows, see come out and say you're old. A sudden chill.
I'm going to start with a revelation. Brace yourselves. Teenagers argue with their parents. There, I said it. Perhaps not such a big revelation, since most people who know teenagers will know that if they're in the right mood, they could have an argument alone on a deserted island. But this case starts with an argument between a teenage girl and her mother. But before we jump to this key moment in what will become a decade-plus long tragic story, we need to look at the background of a girl named Brittanee Drexel. In the early 1990s, a man of Turkish descent, John Kayoglu, was in a relationship with a woman called Dawn. Dawn had a baby girl on October the 7th, 1991 that was named Brittanee. Now, John and Dawn were teenagers and not married, and they had drifted apart while Dawn was still pregnant. But shortly after Brittanee's birth, Dawn met and married Chad Drexel, with Brittanee taking the Drexel surname. Brittanee was born in Rochester, New York, and after Chad had completed his military service, the family settled in a suburb of Rochester called Chile. Brittanee was generally a healthy child, but she was diagnosed with persistent hyperplastic primary vitreous in her right eye, and this required various surgeries to try to correct. The result of the surgeries was total blindness in her right eye. And as a result of these issues, this eye had a tendency to wander. So Brittanee would wear special contact lenses to try to prevent this, which in turn gave her a pretty distinctive look. She grew into a precocious teenager with strong opinions and sense of independence that belied a level of naivety. By 2009, she was approaching her 18th birthday, and she had a big group of friends, as well as a boyfriend named John Greco. Some of her friends were planning to go to Myrtle Beach in South Carolina for spring break that year, and they asked Brittanee if she wanted to go along as well. Brittanee agreed and was really excited about the prospect, but said that she would need to ask her mother first. Around April the 20th, Brittanee duly asked Dawn if she could go. Dawn said no, since she didn't really know any of the friend group, and there were no adults among the group intending to go along as well. It would be fair to say that Brittanee wasn't very impressed with her mother's reaction to the possible trip. What followed was 2 days of constant arguments between the mother and the daughter, which at times became quite heated. After 2 days with no resolution beyond Brittanee not being allowed to go, Brittanee said she wanted to spend a couple of days at her friend's home to calm down and let the dust settle over the arguments. And Dawn made this concession to allow the situation to simmer down. Being a rebellious teenager, Brittanee duly took the opportunity to just head to Myrtle Beach with her friends anyway. On April the 25th, the group had arrived at the Bay Harbor Hotel in Myrtle Beach. And after they had settled in, Brittanee took advantage of a quiet moment to call her mother to tell her that she was at the beach, being careful not to tell her mother which beach. Dawn readily accepted this, since the weather in Rochester at the time was particularly warm. So she assumed that Brittanee was talking about one of the several beaches along the Lake Ontario shoreline. And she further assumed that by making the best of things, their arguments had been forgotten. But of course, Brittanee wasn't on the Lake Ontario shoreline. She was in Myrtle Beach, and she was about to make a regrettable decision. While her mum didn't know where Brittanee was, her boyfriend John Greco did. He was unable to make the trip as he had work commitments back in Rochester, but they had been in regular text contact during these early parts of the trip. Now, things on the trip started well, and after they'd settled in, the group moved on to the beach in front of the Bay Harbour Hotel. But Brittanee then made two decisions that would change the holiday into a nightmare. Brittanee had a long-time friend who was also staying in Myrtle Beach. This friend was a short distance down South Ocean Boulevard at the Blue Water Resort, and Brittanee wanted to catch up with her friend. But she made the decision to walk to the other resort, and just as critically, she had made the decision to go alone. Not that there was anything in the tourist mecca to be overtly afraid of, but if anything went wrong or her friend wasn't there, no one would know what had happened beyond her leaving her friends on the beachfront, which happened at around 8 p.m. She continued texting back and forth with John Greco until about 9:15 p.m. and that was when all contact abruptly stopped. Now, this was very unusual for Brittanee, so it didn't take long for John to get concerned. And it was only a short time after the texts had stopped coming that John began calling some of the friends that he knew Brittanee had gone to Myrtle Beach with, to see if they knew what was going on. It may have been something completely innocuous, but with him in Rochester, he hoped that the friends who were with Brittanee would have a better idea of what the issue was. When they reported that they had no idea where Brittanee was, John made the difficult decision to call Brittanee's mother, Dawn. Now, John knew that Dawn was unaware that Brittanee had gone to Myrtle Beach against her mother's express wishes. So he also knew that letting Dawn know could have potentially caused a problem between him and Brittanee. But John was concerned enough to believe it was the right thing to do, and he hoped that Brittanee would understand. Now, Dawn immediately tried to call Brittanee's cell phone, but with no success. She contacted her husband, Brittanee's adopted father, Chad, and between them they decided to contact Rochester Police in the hope that they could liaise with the police in South Carolina to try to locate the 17-year-old. Continued calls to Brittanee's cell phone that evening were still being sent directly to voicemail. The next day, search efforts by police in Myrtle Beach began in earnest. Quite sensibly, their initial efforts focused on CCTV footage from the beachfront the previous evening. Brittanee had indeed made it to the Blue Water Resort where her friend was staying, and the visit was confirmed, and footage showed Brittanee at the resort the previous evening. But after this, the trail ran cold. The spotlight immediately fell on an acquaintance of Brittanee's named Peter Brozowitz. He was a 20-year-old nightclub promoter that Brittanee knew from Rochester. He had met Brittanee at a nightclub a couple of nights before, and he was the last person known to have had contact with Brittanee before she fell off the radar. Now, he and the friends he was sharing a suite with were all interviewed to little success. Police stopped short of calling him a person of interest, with them saying only that no one had been ruled in or ruled out of the investigation. The police searched Brittanee Drexel's hotel room, finding all of the clothes that she was not confirmed as wearing from CCTV, but her purse and cell phone were missing. So the phone potentially held another investigative avenue. So efforts were made to track the phone. Network pings were tracked on a path leading around 50 miles or around 80 kilometers south of Myrtle Beach, in an area along US Route 17 near the Georgetown-Charleston county line. These pings had stopped abruptly early on the morning of April the 26th. Areas near there and also around Myrtle Beach where a body might have been disposed of were then searched for 11 days. But nothing was found, and the investigation rapidly went cold. The next event of note was when an apartment in Georgetown County was searched in 2011. But this yielded no leads and led to no viable suspects. During the time that the investigation was seemingly dormant, Brittanee's mother, Dawn, sought to keep the case in the public eye, and equally to keep that public eye on the most realistic suspect to date, that being nightclub promoter Peter Brozowitz. The two had a number of high-profile confrontations on the Dr. Phil show, which I can't show because the Dr. Phil people are very efficient with the copyright stick. But the take-home messages were that Brozowitz was upset at the damage to his reputation, and that Dawn had permanently relocated to Myrtle Beach so she could be on the spot for any developments as and when they happened. As time went on, Dawn developed a theory that Brittanee had been trafficked from the Myrtle Beach area. While this was a possibility, the police found it unlikely, since trafficking in South Carolina tended to be in known areas, which didn't include the heavily policed tourist area of Myrtle Beach.
Here the first time I was going to find her and bring her back home.
The search to bring New York native Brittanee Drexel home is 3.5 years running, and the family knows as much today as they did on day one.
Unfortunately, Brittanee went missing on spring break back in 2009, and I know somebody out there knows what happened, and they just need to come forward and give us the information we need to find my daughter.
Even though years have passed since Brittanee was last seen leaving the Blue Water Resort on Ocean Boulevard, this weekend her mother Dawn Drexel is searching again because this Sunday is Brittanee's 21st birthday.
Even though Brittanee's not here, we still want to honor her birthday.
And as for the possibility her daughter may not be alive,
I've been told that it was a possibility, but I mean, that's all a family of a missing child has, is hope that they're still out there. I've never had that pit in my stomach that, you know, a mother would get, that her child is gone.
I think about it all the time.
Lester and Joanna Leonard own Chelsea Joe's restaurant in Murrells Inlet, and they've decided to pitch in to help the search.
We're giving 20% of our proceeds tonight from 4 until 10, and some of our waitresses and waiters are giving 10% of their tips tonight.
And Dawn Drexel says there's only one way the searches to bring Brittanee home will ever end.
I'm never going to stop searching for Brittanee. If I have to come here every year, 2 or 3 times a year, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to find my daughter.
Things then went quiet for a couple more years. But in 2016, things regarding Brittanee Drexel's disappearance heated up once more. An FBI news conference stated that they believe Brittanee was murdered shortly after disappearing, and the cell phone pings were a strong indicator that she was taken to the area of Georgetown. While they believed she had been killed, they did offer a $25,000 reward to anyone with information that could finally resolve the case. The next major development in the case came just 6 months after that FBI conference. And the main player in this was a prison inmate called Taquan Brown, and another inmate called Timothy Deshawn Taylor was implicated. During a bond hearing for Taylor, it was reported that Taquan Brown had himself reported that he'd seen Brittanee being sexually assaulted by Taylor when Brown had gone to a stash house in McClellan to give money to Taylor's father. While it was very much a case of he said, and everything was based on the accounts of a prison inmate, the allegations were taken seriously and led to the search for corroborating evidence. Some corroboration was found, but this came from the account of a different prison snitch, so whether it was reliable was open to debate. Things continued to move forward with polygraph tests and even a constitutional challenge to the dual sovereignty doctrine, which allowed separate state and federal prosecutions for the same offence. But despite the ongoing accounts of Taquan Brown, no physical evidence was found, and Brown's accounts seemed to lose credence over time. So the investigation into Brittanee Drexel's disappearance and her current whereabouts remained a mystery. It was 2022 before things took what would turn out to be their final turn. In May of that year, a known sex offender called Raymond Moody turned himself in at the Georgetown County Sheriff's Office on an obstruction of justice charge. He was of interest in the Brittanee Drexel investigation as early as 2012. What followed was a game of interrogative cat and mouse between police and Moody, and also Moody's girlfriend Angel Voss. The following clips indicate how things progressed, with Angel ultimately making a cooperation agreement with police, and Moody ultimately confessing to Brittanee's abduction and murder.
I was all shook up because, what had happened.
A confessed killer in his own words.
For the first time ever, the 15th Circuit Solicitor's Office has released that video of Raymond Moody, Brittanee Drexel's murderer.
After more than a decade of mystery, he pleaded guilty to her kidnapping, rape, and murder earlier this month.
Blair Sable has reviewed his initial confession tape to investigators. Blair, how is it different from the scene we saw from court earlier this month?
Well, Brittanee Drexel's family, one by one, addressed her killer, and we saw an emotional Raymond Moody then. He even called himself a monster as he addressed the court and apologized. But just a few months prior, as he confessed his crimes to investigators on the record, he's nonchalant, even cracking jokes.
Do you remember what her clothes were? Do you remember what she was wearing?
Hey, I thought I remember where the hell up here at.
Though he tells investigators he remembers it like yesterday, he did have trouble at first finding the remains and leading investigators there, as well as recalling a few details from 13 years ago. The nearly hour-long video is taken a day after the 62-year-old was charged with obstruction of justice. In his orange jumpsuit and coffee in hand, he recalls the fateful day in 2009 where he picked up Drexel from a sidewalk in Myrtle Beach with the promise of partying. Moody says she voluntarily got into his car and joined his then-girlfriend Angel Voss to a campsite in the Georgetown area. He also tells authorities he had no intention of attacking her at first. Then Voss left, leaving the two of them alone.
I wasn't thinking of doing anything wrong. We're just having a good time.
What caused things to go wrong?
Nothing caused it for mine.
Your mind?
For mine, yeah. Just for some reason, reverted back to the kind of person I used to be.
Now, he says he panicked after forcibly raping the teen, strangling her before she had a chance to escape. When his ex-girlfriend returned, he made up an excuse that Drexel had called her friends and suggested that they not camp there for the night. Now, after not being able to sleep a wink, he returned to the crime scene and buried her body in another location. In his confession, he also says he got rid of his clothing and her clothing. He put it in a donation box. Now, he says he also threw her phone into the river, but did hold on to her high school ID for a little while before getting rid of it too. Now, Moody is a registered sex offender who served half of his sentence in a California prison for the rape of several children. He was released in 2004, and records show that South Carolina law enforcement was searching for any evidence that may have tied him to Drexel's disappearance as early as 2011, 2 years after she went missing. Now, he's currently housed at the Litchfield Detention Center, and the Department of Corrections says they will not grant an interview with Moody or any other inmate out of respect for victims. He will serve the rest of his life in custody. Blair Sable, Live 5 News.
June 2nd, 2022, about 1 month after Raymond Moody was arrested for the kidnapping, rape, and murder of 17-year-old Brittanee Drexel, multiple law enforcement investigators sat down with Ernest Merchant. Merchant was Moody's former romantic partner. He says that he fell in love with Moody during their time at a California prison together in the early 2000s. During this 2-hour-long conversation, both investigators and Merchant were asking each other questions about Brittanee Drexel's killer.
To think that I ever loved him. And now I feel like I never knew him at all.
During a 2-hour talk with investigators, Ernest Merchant recalled how he met Raymond Moody in prison, developed a relationship with him, and eventually started a life with him after prison in Georgetown, South Carolina.
I think that I knew a part of him. I knew the part of him that tried to be better, that wanted to be a better person.
When investigators asked about his behavior, Merchant says Moody was never cruel, unkind, or violent toward him. But Merchant recalls Moody's behavior changing almost immediately after getting off parole.
His attitude was, I've done, 25 years of being under supervision, and I'm free and I'm going to do what I want.
Their relationship ended shortly after when Merchant says he caught Moody having an affair with Angel Voss, forcing Moody to move out of their home. Voss became one of the last people to see Brittanee Drexel alive. After ending their relationship, Merchant says there were a handful of times that Moody, quote, really scared him.
I realized I didn't know him at all. That look. That look, that one that said, I could kill you.
While he says at the time he didn't know anything about Moody's involvement in Drexel's murder, Merchant told investigators that he thought Moody was capable of doing it.
I can't say it out loud. It makes me so sad. It makes me so sad for that poor family, for that poor girl. And I pictured it. I had it going over and over in my head and realizing that he drove right past where I was sleeping.
Around the time of Drexel's disappearance, Merchant says Moody had scratches on his face, now believing those scratches came from Brittanee Drexel.
Claw marks and on the face and neck and the bald head. He shaved his head.
Merchant says at one point he confronted Moody about Drexel's disappearance.
I asked him, I said, did you have anything to do with that girl's disappearance? No, I would never do anything like that. I would never do anything like that. And I guess I believed him. But that thing has never left me.
During the 2-hour sit-down, investigators weren't the only ones asking questions, as Merchant had some of his own. Asking, why did Moody turn himself in? Their response was limited as the investigation was still ongoing.
There was a series of events that occurred, and I don't know if this same outcome would have occurred 5 years ago had the same steps been taken. I think there was a confluence of events that led to this all working.
And after hearing rumors, Merchant asked if Moody is terminally ill.
But he's dying of brain cancer and all that kind of stuff. I'm like, well, I don't really care, I hope it's painful.
It wouldn't surprise me if he was. I'm a medical doctor. I am.
Another investigator added there are, quote, some health concerns.
The only person who ever told this story to is my lawyer.
And tonight we are working for you, digging even deeper into the evidence that investigators and prosecutors used to build their case against now convicted killer Raymond Moody. Among the evidence released today by the 15th Circuit Solicitor's Office is audio of a conversation between investigators and Moody the day that he was arrested. ABC 15's Emma Parkhouse joins us live in the studio with some of the chilling things that Moody had to say. Emma.
Jen, Raymond Moody was taken into custody by authorities on May 4th, 2022, and while sitting down with his lawyer and multiple law enforcement representatives, he recalled the details of the night that he raped and killed 17-year-old Brittanee Drexel. Before we begin sharing pieces of this audio recordings and others, we do want to warn that some of this may be disturbing to viewers. They started from the beginning, asking Moody how he and his then-girlfriend, Angel Voss, crossed paths with Brittanee Drexel on Ocean Boulevard in Myrtle Beach on April 25th, 2009.
The Drexel girl walking along the sidewalk, and
I was smoking pot. She noticed that, walked over through the door and said something about that smells like good weed. I said, yeah, you want some? Sure. Get in. She hopped right in the back without a problem.
Moody says the three of them made small talk, eventually inviting Drexel down to the Pole Yard boat landing in Georgetown.
When she got in the vehicle, did you know it was for a bad purpose? No, not at all. That didn't even cross my mind.
Moody says Drexel went with them willingly, but after Voss left is when Moody says things went bad, admitting to sexually assaulting Drexel and then murdering her.
Things got out of hand. Panicked and she panicked and I strangled her.
Moody says he hid her body by the boat landing until he could bury it in a different location later on without his then girlfriend knowing. During this conversation, prosecutors asked Moody if he recalled what he did with Drexel's personal belongings, like her phone and her purse.
Actually, I dropped it in the donation box at the Salvation Army in Georgetown.
All of her stuff, the phone included, and her purse?
Not the phone.
What did you do with the, where did the phone go?
You can answer that, but we can wrap that up.
I threw the phone in the river.
During another interview with Moody on May 5th, he added he burned or cut up all of Drexel's forms of identification. In the initial interview, when discussing the location of Drexel's remains, Moody told investigators he would only tell them if his former girlfriend Angel Voss was not held responsible for any part of Drexel's death. This was their response.
Our assumption all along was that you probably were the one that knew where the body was at. Mm-hmm. And I think our actions show that we tried to talk to her many times. We tried to see if she would cooperate. We tried to picture because she's not the focus of our investigation. The focus of our investigation was you.
Moody says Voss never knew anything about what happened to Drexel that night. While interviewing Voss on May 11th, investigators asked her if she was ever suspicious of Moody's behavior.
No, I mean, he's never made me suspicious one little bit until things came on TV. And then I'm like, okay, what's going on? And he said, I told you, was she there? And that was my answer I got every time I said anything about it. He never said one word about the night or anything after that to me.
Moody referred to Voss as a victim of his too for, quote, the way he used her for many years.
What we have been able to do is to return a body to Chad and Dawn and hopefully start the process of closure.
On Saturday, Richardson says he received a call from Sled Police Chief Mark Keel confirming the remains found along Old Town Avenue in Georgetown County belong to Brittanee Drexel. While he hopes the Drexel family can grieve properly now, he tells me justice is never going to be good enough.
The next step for us will really be discovery and collecting all of the evidence and getting it in one place so that the defense attorneys can look at it.
Richardson says altogether they have around 100 boxes of evidence collected over the last 13 years, with that evidence being spread out between several different departments. Richardson says depending on how Moody responds to the charges, they will either create a guilty plea or begin putting together a trial.
Then we will have an arraignment, figure out if Mr. Moody wants to plead guilty or if he wants to go to trial.
Corroboration was provided when Moody gave a location for Brittanee's remains. On May the 11th, human remains were located buried in the woods off a gated private drive outside Georgetown, about 4 feet into the ground. These remains were identified as Drexel's through DNA and dental records on May the 15th. Moody told law enforcement that he and his girlfriend had driven up to Myrtle Beach to party when they saw Drexel walking down the street and asked if she wanted to party and smoke some marijuana. According to Moody, Drexel voluntarily got into the vehicle and he didn't attempt to hurt her at that time. Moody said that the three of them ended up at a campsite that Moody had in Georgetown County. At some point in the night, his girlfriend left the campsite to attend to a family member, and that was when Moody came on to Drexel and she resisted his sexual advances. He told law enforcement that's when he essentially kidnapped her and sexually assaulted her. Moody said once he realized what he had done, he realized he was going to go back to prison, and that's when he strangled her. Drexel had been strangled and then buried by the morning of April the 26th, 2009. Georgetown County Sheriff's Office, along with Brittanee Drexel's family, made the information public on May the 16th, along with the announcement of Moody's arrest. Moody was charged with murder, kidnapping, and first-degree criminal sexual misconduct, all alleged to have occurred on the day that Brittanee Drexel disappeared. On October the 19th, Moody pleaded guilty to all charges and was subsequently sentenced to life in prison with an additional 2 consecutive terms of 30 years.
I was a monster, and I took Brittanee Drexel's life.
13 years for authorities to arrest Moody. He finally confessed when he thought his longtime girlfriend was going down for Drexel's murder. Ian Emerson broke the story. So Ian, who was that woman and why did Moody want to protect her?
Well, Katie, her name is Angel Voss. She dated Moody for years, and she had been talking to the police about him. This is Angel Voss. She spoke to police several times about Raymond Moody.
He says, you go anywhere and I can find you and you might disappear.
In the end, her freedom was more important than his silence.
My heart is broken, my life forever changed. So many lives destroyed by your selfish actions.
I didn't hear from Dawn until that Saturday, and that was when I got the call. Your daughter's missing. Yeah. So the first thing I went to was, wait a minute. What do you mean she's missing from Myrtle Beach?
In 2009, Moody picked up Brittanee while she was walking down the main drag in Myrtle Beach. He drove her to a boat landing just south of Georgetown, where he raped and killed her. He buried her a few miles away. And there her body stayed for 13 years until Moody led police to her body.
Consistent with exactly how Mr. Moody said she would be face down, 6 feet in, with her head facing in a certain direction. So when I say we were able to corroborate things like that only he would know as the true person responsible, we believe that to be true.
For 13 years, I have searched for Brittanee and suffered the loss of a child.
And in a way, so did Joanne Taylor, whose son had been convicted in the court of public opinion for Brittanee's disappearance. When you Google your name, what's the name that comes up right next to you?
Brittanee Drexel.
Questions remain about Moody's predatory past and those years he walked free.
Don said there are still some questions. We wonder if there are any more shallow graves out there. We wonder how many other lives has Mr. Moody destroyed? And I know Don And I and her family, we're going to keep digging and get some of those answers. And the determination of law enforcement is second to nothing I've ever seen down here working real hard. But I think they would all agree with me. We wouldn't be standing here if it wasn't for the determination of a grieving mother.
So that was the convoluted and drawn out road to justice for Brittanee Drexel and all those that love and miss her. It was a strange story that went in numerous directions before coming back to the age-old pervert who was rejected tagline. Raymond Moody quite rightly belongs in the collective of cockwombles that we've seen in my episodes to date, and no doubt will continue to see. Brittanee Drexel was just 17 years old, and even though she defied her mother in an act of typical teenage rebellion, she was a completely innocent victim of a known predator. This video is of course dedicated to this young lady who would undoubtedly have gone on to do great things and made her parents immensely proud. I truly hope she found peace after such a horrifying end. Thank you for watching another episode of Murder of Crows. I'm Steve. This per machine is Samson. And we will see you when we see you.